Hello, and welcome to lecture number 12 for the Craftsman Style, also known as American Craftsman and an offshoot of the arts and crafts movement coming out of Britain and invading the entire world. Craftsman Style was an American, still is, an American residential style primarily. It also involved all of the arts, but very much in the way that British arts and crafts was very much about getting back to the materials and the workmanship and honesty and a purity and a passion for the characteristics of materials and the ways that they could be used. Craftsman style didn't go as far as Art Nouveau in decorative, frilly, um, the whiplash curve and things like that we talked about last time, but it did have heavy inspiration from Japanese craftsmanship, just like Art Nouveau. And the style showcased fine woodworking, masonry, and interior design. So functional, spacious homes and floor plans, and always a natural, homey feel. So the whole thing being designed to be a home, and with the thought of what a family needs, because by this time, 1905 up into the 1940s and 50s, the idea of the American dream and the American family, as we know it today, as we knew it a few decades ago, I guess more properly, had coalesced. And so the Craftsman style was a residential style primarily built for families. Um, these houses are everywhere. They were huge in Southern California. They spread and became huge across the Southwest. But there are many in Omaha and Lincoln, and there are many throughout the entire country and some throughout the rest of the world as well. I live in a Craftsman style. When I lived in Tucson in the Southwest, I lived in a Craftsman style. Many of you may have lived or currently live in one as well. If not, you see one every single day as you're on your way to school or anytime you go anywhere. They're absolutely everywhere, but they're incredibly beautiful and they're my favorite style. And they're worth noting because you see these types of houses all the time, but they're incredibly unique in the collection of characteristics that comes together to make a craftsman. So let's look at some of these things and talk about some of their major features. So here's an interior. We were just looking at an exterior of a Craftsman style. This is an interior. Many Craftsman style homes, especially the Craftsman bungalow like this, that is a later keyword, are not this decorative and not this nice. But what we see here is the passion for fine woodworking and natural shapes and homey environments coming to the forefront. Here's another Craftsman style house, very much that Americana idealization of a way of life. Literally, the white picket fence is in this photo. And this would be a great set for plays like All My Sons or Proof or other all American plays that deal with the question of the American identity. Our first keyword is the bungalow. So a bungalow is, and even outside of Craftsman, bungalow is a small squarish house, typically of one story. But for Craftsman style, most Craftsman style dwellings are bungalows. You can see both of the houses in this photo are bungalows. And a bungalow, like I said, small, typically one story to 1.5 stories, meaning that the second story might have a sloped roof inside of it instead of squared off walls, kind of like the room I'm in right now. And it would often have dormer windows. It would have a front porch that's covered by a gabled roof, just like this. And yeah, bungalows are by far the most numerous Craftsman style dwelling. Craftsman began as a vacation and resort style. If you went to some place by the shore with your family for a week, you might rent a Craftsman bungalow, even if you didn't live at one. And they became popular as they were designed with the functionality of living in them in mind, and so they spread throughout the world. In fact, Sears, a company that today is back and forth with bankruptcy constantly, used to be, of course, one of the largest companies in the world. They used to sell Craftsman style houses in kits that would the entire contents would arrive via mail order, and you could build or have it built. So you would see a lot of these floor plans are similar or the same with minor variations in materials as well. Here's a typical house. You might see a house just like this walking down any street in America. But if you look at some of the details we're going to talk about, if you come back to this picture, you can see that there are a lot of really unique things that we haven't seen in any other styles and that you don't see on a lot of other residential styles. Here's another Craftsman style. So you can see here the common porch and front vented louvers and brackets and mixed materials. And here are a few more Craftsman style bungalows. So they can look a lot of different ways, but in general, a smallish house of this particular styling is a Craftsman bungalow. And you see these everywhere. Tapered front porch columns. Lots of different color combinations, but frequently pastels and jewel tones in combinations that are very unique to this time period and that we don't see willingly replicated today very much unless you're building a new Craftsman, which is frequently done. Our next keyword is the built-in. So in keeping with the passion for woodworking, a lot of furniture would be built into the wall, and it would be permanently there from the beginning of the house and meant to always stay. It could include storage, cabinets, buffets, bookshelves, all of this stuff. If you've ever been in a Zoom meeting with me, this is my usual Zoom background. These built-ins provide beautiful additional storage to the house. Here's some bookshelves, kind of a Moorish arch on top of those bookshelves. All of these shelves take up space, but not as much as they would if you bought them separately and brought them into the room. And they're designed to go with the house. Look at how the door has exactly the right amount of room to open and close before it hits the bookshelf. A lot of these houses, power was added, electricity was added to these after the fact because they started being popular around 1905. And you can see that there's an outlet in the floor here. It was not planned for in the construction of the house. It was often added later. Here's another series of built-ins. So quite beautiful, often to display things as much as they were for storage. And really nice stained glass. You could put dishware in here that is near the dining room so you can get to it easily. Here's some bookshelves. Typically Craftsman is often raw, stained, or glossed wood like this, but sometimes it is also white, or sometimes modern renovators will paint something white. Here's some more built-ins as well. So lots of different uses for all kinds of built-ins, not only these bookshelves, but you can see in the back there is a built-in series of benches and either a built-in buffet or a built-in area specifically for a buffet. And here's a built-in buffet and bar. Looks like it's maybe between the kitchen and the dining room. And here's a built-in in a kitchen. You can see there's some new cabinetry in the distance, but the near foreground stuff is original. And another major feature of Craftsman style stuff, but especially windows and doors like this, is it's a very Art Nouveau feature. This is 6 panels over 3, but if you look at Craftsman style windows, you might see 4 over 3 or 6 over 3 in the windows as well. I wonder if I can find one of those really quick. Yeah, so the windows in this house, they're 4 over 1. We'll see it again. And so these built-ins could go as complex as you could want, and they could be incredibly beautiful, very functional, and very lovely. This is an extremely common built-in pattern. It exists in the house that I live in, a fireplace with bookshelves on either side of it. It is an easy way to do built-ins. It's simple. It's often bungalows were built cheaply, and so they wanted to have built-ins. So this would be like the easy version of doing that versus like these like extremely complex and nice houses and built-ins like that, right? Another thing that you can see in this picture is the sort of pointy trim on top of the windows. And for lack of a better term, pointy trim is a very Japanese feature. And the like shocking and amazing level of Japanese craftsmanship and woodworking, shows up a lot and is brought heavily into arts and crafts, Art Nouveau, and the Craftsman style in America. So we'll see that a lot in the roof structures, in the eaves, and in the rafters, and we'll see it in interior trim as well. You can see a lot of those features here, but our next keyword is tapered columns. Oh, here are some 3/1 window sashes, so 3 panes of glass over one. That's just a very Art Nouveau feeling. It makes something more complex than it needs to be and gives it sort of a natural feeling. Bigger at the bottom, smaller and lighter at the top. Tapered columns are exactly the same thing, and tapered columns are what you see right here before you. Part of the immense influence of Japanese arts on the arts and crafts movement, columns that are narrower at the top than the bottom. They're often inset with decorative panels, and frequently they sit on a base of stone or brick. So we can see this picture on the left and the picture on the right are both inset with panels, and the one on the right sitting on stone. Here's some more lovely tapered columns. You get this, you see what it is. But it gives a natural feeling, kind of like Art Nouveau. It feels like a tree. Trees get narrower as they get to the top, so it's just sort of a homey, natural kind of thing to include. And our next keyword is decorative rafters and brackets. So along this same line, having curvy or whiplash curves or other natural feeling shapes in decorative wood objects that are a fundamental part of the house is a key part of Craftsman style. So these rafter tails. So rafters are parts of the roof structure, right? The main beams that are holding up the shingles or whatever you have as the roof. Those are the rafters, as opposed to the same thing in floors. Those are joists. And you almost never see joists, but you can see rafters if they are exposed like this, if that's part of the design. So to elaborately decorate and so to cut out a shape into the rafter tails is a major Craftsman feature. And you can see that here. And the other thing that we're talking about in these two keywords, so it's those decorative rafter tails and brackets. Brackets are everywhere. So this big plant looking thing here in the middle, that's a gable bracket. If you remember, a gable roof is like an A that just points right at you. That's a gable. And this is a gable bracket. And there's no brackets there. And this house has a bunch of brackets. So these things, it's like the rafter, or like the center rafter beam or whatever is sticking out of the house past the wall. And it's got a little support on it, like a shelf bracket. This is a house bracket. And there could be lots of different types. Look at these lovely inset columns and these 6/1 windows. As you learn these terms, it all starts to come together in an understanding of what Craftsman style is. So here's some lovely decorative rafter tails. This was possible to do in the Southwest where these houses became popular because it's very dry there. But you don't want to expose wood like this, especially with a decorative edge, here or in a lot of other parts of the country where it is cold and wet, because this wood will start to deteriorate. And in this picture on the left, you can see that it already has done that. But there are many different shapes of decorative rafter tails. There are some subcategories of Craftsman style that are definitely worth looking into, like Mar del Plata and Mission Revival is kind of a similar style. But the main Craftsman style included these decorative gable brackets, wall brackets, and decorative rafter tails. Here's some naturally stained ones, gable brackets. And so you can see the influence of Art Nouveau with the curvy shapes that speak to a natural feeling and desire. The sunburst is a huge Art Deco motif, which is coming a little bit later, but also is a huge like California and Southwest kind of a thing. And another thing that is also included in this is decorative louvers. So in places where it was extremely hot, but before the air conditioning was invented in like the 30s and 40s, the 40s I think, the gables of these houses would have these louvers in them. So what you're seeing here, the stripiness is not just color, it's actually the dark is holes in the gable facade that they have a huge amount of air to pass through there, and they would cover it with like a wire mesh, like screen door material. But you wanted air to move out of the top of your house because heat rises, and so that would help to cool your house, especially in the Southwest. So in the picture on the left, another interesting louver, some decorative rafter tails, some tapered columns. On the picture on the right, some decorative rafter tails and brackets. Our next keyword is cedar shakes. So craftsman style houses would, in keeping with the arts and crafts, use many different materials in a kind of harmony. And one of the main materials that is of great interest were cedar shingles, squares or rectilinear, that would be overlapped in sort of an undulating pattern. They would frequently be stained, but they might also be painted. This picture on the top right is a modern version that you can get that I think is made out of plastic, but it looks good. You could paint it. But a lot of these stained cedar shake houses you can see develop a patina over time that is quite beautiful and just speaks to the house's relationship with nature. So we'll talk about mixed materials in a few minutes, but here's a beautiful example of the different ways that materials can exist to give the overall structure more of a story. And so cedar shakes can appear a little bit or they can appear a lot. This house has extensive cedar shakes. All of its non-brick surfacing is cedar shake, but it's all been painted. This is a very, very dark house for a craftsman style house. The time period that these were built in, yes, were very, very natural focused, much like came again in the 70s. The 20s and 30s were very nature focused, and so the greens here and the burgundy really speaks to that. But it also was a time of great optimism, and it was a time when a lot of things were bright, and a lot of developments in pigment allowed for bright paints that would endure for the first time. So cedar shakes are relatively self-explanatory, quite lovely, very, very striking, and immediately tells you that you're dealing with a craftsman. And look at the columns in this house. Couldn't be more Japanese. Very, very beautiful. And an interesting louver at the top and large, large brackets. Our next keyword is stucco. Very much a California thing. It is a plaster recipe that, as we've seen from all the way from lecture 1, covering stuff with a paste is very popular, and stucco makes a house surfacing sort of not really jump out at you very much, but it is one of the flattest and least impactful things that you can do to a house. Stucco has a tendency to age and chip and crack and get brittle, but it comes in a variety of textures. You can see two distinct textures here. All this kind of stone looking thing that goes on over a large surface area is applied and then textured with a variety of tools, whether it's a blocking like is in the top left photo, or whether it's a stipple brush like is in the top right. You will also see that this was the time when doing stippled ceilings and popcorn ceilings that are so horrible. Probably the worst invention and worst feature of craftsman style homes is the horrible popcorn ceiling. It helps with sound, and it's probably easier and more durable than a huge flat ceiling that's very difficult to get up there upside down and make really smooth and flat, but terrible. Like one of the great terrible things is that all the incredibly beautiful hardwood floors that were put in during this time period, we'll see people come over the next 10 to 20 to 30 years and put carpets and linoleum and stuff all over them, which absolutely disgusting. But linoleum is quite an old technology and was part of some of the original construction of these buildings as well. Here's a lovely bungalow in stucco with a lot of the other features that we've talked about as well. From a distance, stucco just looks like a flat wall surfacing. This isn't really a craftsman style house so much, but it's a good picture of stucco. Here's a large modern stucco craftsman. Very Japanese to have a extra bevel in the roof rafters. Here's a nice Southwest, like California, Arizona house with the appropriate colors. A interesting louver up there, and stucco. Our next keyword is the Craftsman Colonnade. So if you remember all the way back to the beginning, an arcade is a series of arches, and it may or may not have columns. It may just have piers, which are just square instead of round. A colonnade may or may not have arches, but it's a series of columns in a row. And that's all the way back to the Greeks. But a craftsman colonnade is a thing, it's what you see here, and you'll see them often in houses when you walk in an entryway to separate off the living room or the dining room. Just two columns and maybe a series of bookcases, or maybe just the columns. They're really beautiful, and they're a really unique feature related to built-ins, in that there was frequently storage available in them. They would divide a room without separating the rooms completely. So here's a lovely Craftsman colonnade leading to a fireplace and a staircase. Lots of paneling here, you can see, really interesting and lovely woodwork. Here's sort of an old Craftsman colonnade in a house that looks like it's being renovated. Very interesting asymmetrical storage here. This looks like it might be a bread box or something. Of course it isn't, being near the entryway, but I would love to know if it's gloves or what would be stored in there. And here's a Craftsman colonnade that has been painted. Yeah, really lovely. Very straightforward. Interesting place to set your drink or the mail or your keys. Yeah, and these go all the way up to the high end. And they were everywhere, lots of different styles. Look at this middle one of how lovely and huge it is as both a bookshelf and a display case with tapered columns. So our next keyword is mixed materials, and we've talked about this a little bit already, but it's not just that they didn't have enough of one thing, but the idea that everything in nature is sort of composed of things together in a relationship of harmony and beauty. We saw this with Romanesque. We saw it with classicism. Classical, and this was that classical harmonious idea coming back to the forefront, but without any of the wanting to look like it was Greek, right, or Roman. So all of the features that we see here, the big covered porch, the tapered columns, the use of stone and wood and siding and shingles and cedar shakes and brackets and exposed rafter tails, all of these colors of wood and green and white and burgundy would so easily be a big mess. But what you have here is an incredibly lovely home that is, everything is just right. Here's another example, a great example of mixed materials and mixed colors. Stone and siding and cedar shakes. And here's a modern construction in a similar way, but brick and stone, and it looks like, actually, I can't tell if that's metal siding, but a unique sort of vertical seamed siding. Very lovely. This home as well has many different materials on it, and the harmonious choice of them and their colors was what it was all about. So our last keyword here is the breakfast nook. A small room or area added onto the kitchen for less formal eating than a dining room. The idea of the American family had come to prominence, and a craftsman house was designed specifically to be a part of the family. And so you would see all of the spaces were laid out and other things were added on and created rooms that had never existed before. The idea that there are probably no servants anymore. This is the middle class, regular people living a regular life. The family is cooking, and then they're going to eat together. They don't have to go all the way to the dining room and get out the nice plates. They're going to sit together before they rush off to work and to school. So the breakfast nook, there's a modern, like, upscaled and renovated version, but could be an incredibly lovely place to just sit for a few moments that you would, the few moments that you would have with your family and share toast or whatever have you here. So these, this is an old school one. Certainly, we look back on this color in particular as like the worst color, this green of, and they had fridges and stoves. You could do your whole kitchen in this green. So so gross, but still by far the coolest style. Period. Put that on Twitter. That's the best style. Here's some more breakfast nooks. Yeah, look at this picture on the right. Pointy trim, very Japanese, super lovely, interesting, the coolest style. In the distance behind my chair, you can see how this kitchen is laid out just for that purpose. There's plenty of room for lots of people to be in here and to cook together and for a lot of stuff to get done and for the breakfast nook just to be nearby, that you could just read the news in the morning or have a cup of coffee. So those are our keywords for the Craftsman Style. Bungalow, built-in, tapered columns, decorative rafters and brackets, and also don't forget about louvers, cedar shakes, stucco, Craftsman colonnade, mixed materials, and the breakfast nook. There's so much more to learn and know about all of the styles of this time period. Please take this as an introduction and maybe just to pique your interest a little bit to do some research on your own, because it's all very fascinating. It's very, very beautiful. And a lot of the stuff that we're talking about from here on out, we are surrounded by. So it's super interesting. We have some assignments due this week. I'm going to be opening some things back up and I'm going to send you an email about that. And if you have any questions or any issues, please contact me. I'm here for you at any time. We can Zoom, you can email me, whatever you need. Thank you very much for being here on this lecture, and I look forward to talking with you again.